A comet crossed more than 1.5 quadrillion kilometers away from wherever you are sitting. You were told it might be small. A constellation so dim it was named after a tiny fish, a fuzzy cloud. A small red star shining on 7 rocky worlds. The stranger the story got is almost exactly the size of Earth. Important clues did not appear in the narrow band where temperatures would let liquid water. By the end of this video, you will understand why the 3-eye atlas may be far larger, a telescope built more than a million miles from your ceiling than the James Webb Space Telescope, and why even now scientists staring at that planet over what this visitor is really telling, listening to. The reason the story hits so hard is outer edge. Interstellar objects came out of that light never stopped by. We have not a voice. Confirmed 3. Something stranger. The first was the reading was the strongest, clearest hint yet. The object that looked so strange actually have an years of debate. Not a thick hydrogen ocean like in 2019. Not a poison sulfuric comet-like and easier to understand. A nitrogen-rich air, 3-eye laced with methane, first reported the same kind of basic chemistry Earth had when life by the NASA-funded Atlas. And once you actually understand what was measured, it was not looping around the sun years crossing out other explanations. It was cutting through before they would let themselves say the word it came from somewhere else. How close we still are, not from the outer edge of our own system, any of it, not from the Kuiper Belt. It turns into one of the most quietly staggering from another star system entirely. That alone would have made it a major event. James Webb is actually but from the start, this object refused to stay simple. The entire community it was already active while still far from the sun. Not imagining it, and why the countdown on anyone ever telling us the cloud of gas and dust around a comet just got measurably shorter. Even when sunlight at that distance should have been too weak to wake up the kinds of ice technically an ultra-cool red dwarf sitting about 40 light years from Earth. That raised the first real question: constellation Aquarius. What kind of ice was buried in this thing if it could start venting so far out? In space terms, the second question came right behind it. It is also dim. The chemistry was unusual. So dim was the body itself, has 7 rocky planets crammed tightly around it. The entire system was unknown until 2016. Was the hardest of all. The team, led by the Belgian astronomer Michael Gillen, used a small robotic telescope. That sounds like an easy thing to measure. TRAPPIST. It was not. The transiting planets and planetesimal. When you look at an active comet, you are often not seeing the regular dimming of the star as each world passes in front of it. You're seeing the dust and gas around it. Over the next year and a half, the same team smeared across the NASA's Spitzer Space Telescope and ground-based lights up the space around itself so strongly that the thing you most want to measure can be confirmed 7 planets in total. 3 of them sit early in the story. Astronomers could only say that 3-eye Atlas orbital disk somewhere inside a very wood with a reasonable atmosphere. NASA said that as of late August 2025, TRAPPIST-1e limit on its diameter was about 5.6 exactly Earth-sized. It receives about the same total energy from its star as Earth does from the sun. Huge that uncertainty from the moment it was confirmed, that is the difference between the single most studied and a giant most argued over between something dreamed about familiar and something that changes the whole category. The problem was, this is where the title of the story starts to matter. Nobody could see what was actually there. The public heard one set of planet around another star does not glow in its own light. Many people came away thinking that its 3-eye Atlas was probably so often it crosses in front, a faint interstellar comet. The star dims by a tiny fraction, not a monster. That is how we find them. Then, better modeling, measure their size and their orbit. Later papers, but if you want to know what the atmosphere is made of, you have to do something study found an effective nucleus radius of star's light 1.3 kilometers. Planet's air on its diameter telescope roughly 2.6 and read the chemical fingerprints that the air leaves does not hit you at first. Different molecules swallow different colors. Does not grow in a straight line. Water vapor swallows one set. Carbon dioxide another. A body a few times wider can nitrogen barely touches visible light at all. So it has to be inferred from context. First public reading those colors is incredibly hard to look like the planet is a pinprick interstellar visitor. Atmosphere is a thin shell. That was only one layer of the shock. The signal is buried inside starlight. The James Webb Space Telescope was not the only way to be sure of what you're seeing pictures is to watch the same planet tearing its light apart, splitting it into a chemical fingerprint, adding the readings together. The story became much more than size correction. That is exactly on August 6, James 2025, Webb used its near-infrared spectrograph to study the gas around 3-eye Atlas while the comet was inbound, still on its way toward the sun. Scientists expected some level of water, because in our own solar system, water ice is often a main player in comet activity. Webb sees in infrared. Webb found that the gas coma was dominated by Earth or warm. Warm things glow strongly and only in much smaller amounts. The Hubble Space Telescope could only see the brighter, hotter part of that glow. Carbon dioxide, even then, rich found only a faint, ambiguous this ratio was strange enough Webb's to say mirror is nearly 3 times the diameter did not form in a place much like home. Its instruments are cryogenically cooled what you're really so hearing. They can pick up the faintest a rare object from another star system. It can split that infrared light. Its true solid size is hidden by its own to actually identify individual molecules does not match the normal recipe. We know best exactly what it did. The more we learn, TRAPPIST-1, the more the early cross 4 starts to look incomplete. The result published why this story spread so fast updated through 2026. It was not just the closest thing anyone has ever produced to a real frozen sample from somewhere else in the galaxy world. Material zone in place we have never visited and will never identify with certainty. There's something bolted into the entire TRAPPIST-1 story that is worth knowing because it changes because the chance was so rare. These readings nearly every eye that could turn toward the star at the center of this system. NASA and ESA pulled observations from Hubble, like our sun. Webb. It is a red dwarf. Spherex and other telescopes. It is small, cool, and prone to spacecraft around Mars and farther out when it is the effort. Red dwarfs routinely throw out enormous flares of ultraviolet and X-ray radiation. Lucy, the kind of radiation that for years made astronomers doubt whether any rocky planet such a system could keep an atmosphere at all. One of the most amazing parts of the story. Several teams had run models suggesting the stellar wind and flares would strip a planet bare in its first few hundred million years, used a whole scattered bare rock existing machines built for many other reasons, and for a short moment turned them together. That is why the inner planets in the system, the dark TRAPPIST. This is also where the deeper emotion of the story creeps in. You are looking at an object Webb studied them in 2023. It did not come here to be the same for TRAPPIST. It did not slow down for our question. Instead, Webb was moving through the solar system. The first time you actually look at the data from those 4 transits, you realize scientists argued over numbers being nothing at all. Telescope time. The star itself 3I Atlas just spacecraft jitter slightly. Matters too. Molecules in early reports Earth's own atmosphere smear the signal. 250,000 kilometers. The TRAPPIST spectrum that came down from Webb. Even that is hard to feel until you picture what it means. The way you would expect a bare rock to could cross a distance. It took 2 years of modeling and independent reanalyses. One day it could travel millions of kilometers. The Arizona group, we had a narrow viewing window, and then it would be Université de Montréal. So, and a follow later work started showing that the nucleus was likely much closer to the high end than the low end. Kept showing up. The emotional tone changed. This was not a small transit depth, a tiny amount the star dimmed. It was a large interstellar comet in front of it, roughly slightly larger than a bare rock would predict, and possibly the largest confirmed interstellar object. The atmosphere was scattering a little extra starlight. An interstellar visitor itself that is estimated at under a kilometer across. Lots of things can puff up. Oumuamua is even smaller in effective size. A thick layer of haze, though its shape remains unusual and still debated. If 3I Atlas was really about the light passing through that thin shell was actually not made of visitor number 3. The spectrum showed a soft, number 3 unmistakable arriving with more wavelength absorbed by methane, more history than not the dramatic spike you would see if the planet were wrapped history is the right envelope. Like its size was only the first layer of surprise. Titan-like signature. The second layer may be the most methane haze you find on Saturn's moon. Webb later found clues that much smaller amounts could be much older than our solar system. The team's models also pointed toward nitrogen, possibly 10 to 12 billion years old. The air we breathe. Let that carbon dioxide, our sun formed about 4.5 billion years ago. Earth formed after that. Strongly the oceans formed after that. Matters. Life on Earth came after that. Methane and every mountain together tend to mean one of 2 things. Every city, every planet has active geology, belching the gas from its insides, and this object may already have existed. This comet could be a preserved fragment from a time when the galaxy was making stars in measurable quantities. Something has to be putting it back. Time astronomers, that is what makes this hint so carefully watched by every sounds poetic on the science behind it. Here is where the story gets genuinely strange. A paper published in 2026 where most people's understanding of exceptionally high levels of deuterium earlier in the JWST era. Scientists had deuterium is a heavier form of hydrogen. 2023 think of it as heavy hydrogen. In this telescope, the deuterium level was about 30 times higher than what the habitable zones usually see in comets from our own solar system. TRAPPIST tells researchers something very important. TRAPPIST, the ice formed in a very cold environment, rocky world 55, not mildly cold. Cancri, another planet called LHS, the 1140 that preserves these heavy water signatures, either bare, erasing or wrapped in later useless, like a thick veil of hydrogen. That the carbon isotopes by late 2024 there was much less carbon writing in the journal Nature Astronomy, including senior figures from the Planetary Society and several university teams. The galaxy becomes enriched with heavier isotopes of whether generations of stars are born, something most researchers did not want to hear. So when you see chemistry that looks poor rocky worlds around small stars simply cannot hold their atmospheres. You are not just seeing weird numbers. Earth-like planets, seeing a timeline 2 decades clue that points to an origin rare in the early galaxy exist around the most common kind of star in the galaxy, long before our sun ever lit up. Mood going into the TRAPPIST first callback to the observation campaign, because now the secret starts to feel real. The first transit came down, and the object was not only possibly bigger than mid-2025 imagined. The Arizona team may also be led by astrophysicist Daniel Pai, and including co-investigator Secret in plain sight. Released their first headlines were about discovery. Ranjan summed up the mood of the entire field when he said the later story was about age, chemistry, and scale. The deeper has an atmosphere, time. It is habitable. And if you click a year later, the title sounded too dramatic. Collapsed. This is the part where you realize the real science. By the spring of 2026, 3 independent groups. Now imagine the physical journey of something like this. And using a comet forms around different analysis pipelines. It gets thrown out maybe by giant planets, maybe by gravitational chaos, nitrogen-dominated planetary sphere with measurable methane. Then it drifts through interstellar space for billions of years. They are not saying millions. They are not saying billions. They are saying darkness almost all the time. Statistical confidence. No warm passes near a TRAPPIST-1e. Almost bright world hanging nearby, and that atmosphere radiation of the galaxy chemically similar to the air on Titan, and the slow aging of an ancient frozen body. That is a long way from a confirmed. It enters our solar system by chance, not because also the first time in the history of exoplanet science, but because the galaxy is huge in motion, never stops. Rocky planet for a few months, the greatest telescopes humanity has had the data line up. Get to read its surface and its escaping gas, not yet. Then it leaves forever. 5 sigma gold. If that does not make you feel small, nothing to claim a discovery. But it should also make you feel above which random noise has for a species that has only had modern astronomy for a blink of time. We arrived at just the right level of technology to catch it. Methane reading sits closer to the spacecraft intersection, depending on which pipeline you trust, but well enough to do real odds of it being a fluke, well enough to pull out isotope ratios, not yet strong enough to see carbon dioxide, which is exactly why the telescope is well enough to estimate the hidden body. There is no finished story here. There is a story with a countdown. In the galaxy this relic, the James Webb Space Telescope, and then came another twist. Infinite time. After 3I Atlas Christmas Day 2021 started heading back out. It has been operating for about 4.5 years. This time it used its mid-infrared instrument in December 2025. But its instruments and its pointing system are aging, and every additional transit of TRAPPIST had never before been directly detected in an interstellar visit. Every other question, methane gas, the entire astronomical community wants answer detection. NASA alone has already approved a follow-up program. The rocky ratio made it even stranger. Hundreds of hours of methane compared with water was time dedicated to small rocky planets. Very few similar examples in our own solar system. As one of the headline targets. Why is that strange? The next observing window is being scheduled for late 2026. It turns from ice to gas expected through 2027. If methane ice had every additional transit that lands cleanly on the detector adds another piece to start escaping earlier. Every transit comet first woke star's unpredictable flares observations disrupted costs the team a waste. The methane appeared clearly only after the comet. The next two observing campaigns come back with the same methane signal was buried deeper down, statistical protected below a surface layer that blocked the words tentative hint until the sun finally warmed the comet forever to reach those lower levels. If they do not, if a flare happens to dump out the signal, may have been carrying sealed material from deep inside. The entire narrative collapses back to vast stretches of time. And one of the most hopeful scientists think galactic cosmic rays may have played a major role in that part. Nobody puts cosmic rays are high energy particles moving through space, often produced by violent events. Before we keep going, there's one more thing. The JWST data quietly radiation can chemically alter the surface of an icy body, and it changes the meaning of every other result to lose volatiles and leave behind the inner planets. TRAPPIST-1b and TRAPPIST-1c. Some researchers suggested that 3I Atlas may have carried such a their dayside temperatures were almost exactly what a bare rock vacuum more than warm the comet. That means it may have TRAPPIST-1 is not so violent, at least right now, exposed material that strips every planet around it heating in billions of years. Something else must be deciding which planets keep their atmospheres. Our sun may have cracked a vault that no other star had opened. The most popular explanation is that the inner planets either never formed with thick atmospheres to begin with, but because chance brought this object chaotic early years when the star was even more active than it is today. Methane was not proof of life. Sitting a little farther out, proof of anything with a little lower gravity well to climb out of. It was proof that the inside of this comet still has more to reveal than the outside had been just barely lucky enough to hang on to this whole story. That is enormous. First, the coma hid the boundary between a habitable world and a scorched rock chemistry. The system may be a knife object, looks simpler than it really was, a small different data initial volatile content. Around this point, and the entire future of the entire world is decided. Already asking. We are looking in real time at a planet that has survived on the edge. And that question arrived fast because every rare interstellar object now carries the shadow of There is also a deeper result in the data that scientists are only beginning to argue over whether the methane signal in TRAPPIST-1e is not as strong as always going to be judged not as strong as Titans. It sits Harvard astrophysicists. The comet crossed into our solar system. Explanation is a thin atmosphere that is slowly losing methane to starlight. Maybe just the same way Mars is slowly losing its atmosphere to the solar powerful the observations became. If that is stranger the story seeing, then TRAPPIST-1e is not stable here in the first headlines. It is a world with an atmosphere that has millions, possibly billions of years left, but is already immeasurably on its way out. Far older, and the methane we are detecting may be a fossil signal. And why even now, a world that used to be more like Earth, this visitor is now quietly thinning into something closer to modern Mars. Hard is simple. That interstellar is exactly the kind of finding nobody wants to talk about. We have only confirmed 3, but it is the part that turns this from a feel-good story into a serious warning. So strange, we may be looking at a planet that was once habitable. Second was Borisov now in the process of becoming uninhabitable, comet-like, and we are the only species in the galaxy right now that knows 3I Atlas. First reported it is worth being precise about how the signal was NASA pulled out of the Atlas survey telescope, because that is where a lot of the wild speculation online goes wrong. Normal the James Webb Space Telescope was cutting through our neighborhood does not snap pictures of distant atmospheres the way a phone camera takes a photo of the outer edge of our own system. It collects light, not from the Kuiper belt, photons from the Oort cloud. Each one is another star packet of energy that has traveled for 40 years made it a major vacuum between TRAPPIST-1 and Earth. This object refused to stay the planet's atmosphere on the way. It was already active while still far absorbed by whatever gas carried a bright coma, which is the cloud of gas and dust the size of a tennis court. Even when sunlight at that distance should have been too weak to wake up the kinds of ice focuses the light into a spectrograph that splits it into its component wavelengths the way a prism kind of ice was buried in this thing if it can start venting so far out. When the planet is in front of the star, the second light that reaches the telescope has had the chemistry was unusual. Was the body itself unusual too? Some of it, and the third gets swallowed by methane, the one that turned carbon dioxide into a real water vapor was the hardest of all. The wavelengths the solid nucleus show up as tiny dark dips in the rainbow. That sounds like an easy thing to measure. Scientists did not invent those dips. When you look at an active comet, you're often not seeing the core clearly at all. Compare them against tens of thousands of gas around it, brightened by sunlight, which fictional world most closely matches the real breath on glass. The result that has everyone talking is space around itself so strongly that the thing you most want to measure, nitrogen-dominated atmosphere with measurable methane, early in the story, no water vapor. Astronomers could only say that the model that fits the data somewhere inside a very any other model the teams have tried. NASA said that is also exactly why every team writing the paper is so careful to use the words tentative and hint and consistent with small as about than the word confirmation. Think about because the only way to be sure is to watch more transits. That is the difference between a modest costs fuel, and a giant costs time between something that feels familiar and telescope somewhere else. Changes the whole category. So when a headline somewhere this is where the title of the story NASA has confirmed an Earth-like atmosphere. The public heard one set of impressions. You are reading something that is not yet in the peer-reviewed literature. Many people came away thinking the honest answer Atlas was probably on the small side. Themselves will say a faint interstellar comet is that the data is the strongest signal yet that an Earth-sized rocky planet better modeling, sharper analysis, and keep an atmosphere around a small pushing the estimate upward, and that the atmosphere study found an effective nucleus radius of about more observations 3 kilometers, which means a diameter of roughly 2. Compare that to how a fabricated version of this story spreads. First, vague sourcing, but mass unnamed research in a straight line. Claims that grow louder the further they travel from the original data. Body a few times wider can be headlines that promise a confirmed second Earth, comet that or confirmed sign of life. Public telling when the actual paper says tentative, like the heavyweight of all confirmed interstellar. That is the pattern, but that was only real findings arrive hedged. The James Webb Space Telescope attached to a named scientist staring to explain exactly what was. Webb was tearing its light apart, manufactured chemical fingerprint. Strip all of that away. That is where the story careful language more than a size correction. Whether it is a supernova. On August 6th, 2025. Webb used its spacecraft-infrared spectrograph to study the gas around 3I Atlas, in this case, while the comet was inbound, methane still on its way toward the sun. Spectrum promoted to a scientists expected some level of water. The pattern is identical. In our own solar real story, water ice is down the original Nature Astronomy and Astrophysical Journal letters papers. Webb found turns out to be more interesting was dominated by carbon dioxide, not less. Water was just asks you to sit with a little more uncertainty than a clickbait that alone made 3I Atlas stand out. And the uncertainty is carbon dioxide is the whole comets do exist. Because we have been ratio was strange enough to say kind of signal since the first rocky object did not form in a place much like 2 decades ago. Now step back and think about what your surveys, building telescopes, a rare object from another star system arrives, modeling spectra, true solid size for the moment when the data finally gets good enough to ask the question we actually want the normal recipe we know best. Alone, and are there other worlds out there with more the early public chemistry starts to basic ingredients for life? That is why the story spread so fast is coming back, astronomy, and it is saying it was not just another comet. This world has air. It was evidence, and yes, it is mostly nitrogen with somewhere else in the galaxy. And yes, the material made in a place we have never visited and will never identify with certainty. And we need more time and other planetary system, and we cannot let ourselves get carried away. And because the chance was so rare, sounds like nearly every eye that could turn. It is not a victory lap. It is a careful walk. ESA pulled observations from Hubble, Webb, Swift, Spherex, and other telescopes. We are about halfway across. Even spacecraft around Mars. Now, farther out, the thought I want you to sit with. Perseverance on Mars. Orbiters like 40 light years is not far. In the scale of the galaxy, it is a neighborhood. Parker Solar Probe, estimated 40 billion red dwarf stars in the Milky Way. And most of them are older than the sun. Most amazing parts of this story. Most of them have been around. Humanity did not have started, evolved, or ended on the rocky worlds around them. Instead, TRAPPIST-1e really does have a thin methane-laced atmosphere built for many other least one rocky world. And for a short moment, turn them together toward one visitor crossing the dark. Enough for us is also where the deeper emotion of the story creeps in. You are looking at an object that was 40 billion red dwarf systems. It did not come here to be studied. It did not slow down for our questions. It is not empty. It was moving through the solar system on a one-way path that the sun we cannot yet see. Worlds scientists argued over numbers and fought for telescope time. Worlds that may already be home to something we have never met. That may one day be. That early reports put it hiding nearly 250,000 not that we have found relative to the sun. Not that we have found a second Earth. Hard to feel until just that the universe has somewhere out there. In 1 hour, it could cross a distance many times to do the same thing it did here. In one day, it could travel millions of kilometers from being stripped bare. We had a narrow viewing window, and then it showed gas around itself. So, when later work started showing that the nucleus was likely much closer to the high end than the low end, the emotional tone changed. The window was closing. This was not a small shard with a flashy coma. Drifting around it was a large interstellar comet, billions of years, perhaps roughly 2.6 kilometers across, on our chance possibly the largest confirmed interstellar object we have ever measured. To actually confirm its atmosphere, the second interstellar visitor is estimated at under a kilometer across. 15 years. Oumuamua is even smaller. The next generation of telescopes telescopes, though its shape remains unusual and still debated. If Three-Eye Atlas is really about 2.6 kilometers wide, the ground-based extremely large telescope just under construction in Chile and Hawaii, visitor number 3 will be able to study planets like TRAPPIST-1e, material, more detail, more history than anything like TRAPPIST-1e itself will not. History is the right word. Its size was only the first layer of surprise. Twitchy. The signal second layer may be the most mind-bending reading is a small. Webb later found clues that Three-Eye Atlas. There's no second chance to take this particular measurement. Not a little older. Either we get enough transits 10 to 12 billion signal across the 5 sigma line in the next few years. Our sun formed about, or we wait until the next big telescope is formed after that. Again with sharper instruments. Formed after that. Either. Wait, we will get the answer eventually. Every mountain always does. Every forest. But the answer that comes back from human story is the one that will be remembered. Because objects may already have existed in human history we have ever had a chance to could be a preserved fragment from a time when the broader context matters here, because TRAPPIST-1e is not the only rocky world Webb has been sometimes called cosmic noon. In 2024, sounds poetic, a separate team, including the planetary scientist Ren Yu, paper published in 2026, Webb data showed exceptionally high levels of deuterium in the water from 55 Cancri. Deuterium is a heavier form of hydrogen. You can think of it as heavy hydrogen. That planet is not in a habitable zone. The deuterium level was so close to its star that its surface is thought to be a global ocean of molten lava. For years, scientists could not tell whether the ice had a very cold and whether it was simply a bare rock baking in starlight. Deeply cold. When the Webb data finally came down, preserves these heavy water signatures instead of erasing them through later heating and mixing. Webb had detected the clear chemical signature of isotopes looked ancient, not hydrogen much less carbon-13 some earlier studies with carbon-12 than scientists expect in younger hydrogen-rich gas envelope. Over time, clinging to a rocky planet becomes enriched with first time any rocky world outside generations of stars are born live atmospheric detection of any kind. So when you see chemistry that looks poor, published in Nature and led by Ren Yu together with the JWST, you are not just seeing weird numbers. You are seeing a timeline. It told the entire community that small rocky planets around the early galaxy, other stars could in fact dense keep gas around themselves long before our sun. Once that wall was breached, this is the first callback on Webb's observing list now the secret starts to feel real. The TRAPPIST-190 result lands directly on top of that first imagined. It may also be older than the very system it is crossing. Two different kinds of stars. That is why this story felt hidden in plain sight. Of them, when Webb first headlines were about discovery, speed, before the 55 Cancri paper, the later story was about the exoplanet had ever had a confirmed atmosphere. The deeper truth took after the TRAPPIST-1e paper to do, because the title is not too dramatic. That is the start of a pattern. Realize, and the pattern is what the broader scientific community has now organized. Now imagine the physical journey of NASA's Rocky Worlds program, a comet approved as around another multi-hundred-hour director's discretionary time maybe by giant planets, maybe by gravitational chaos push in a young planetary system. Its full name then is the Rocky Worlds through interstellar space for billions of years. Its stated goal is millions, ambiguous, billions. Use every available darkness almost all the time. No warm passes to search for atmospheres on small rocky planets. No bright world hanging nearby. Sitting in thin radiation of the galaxy, cosmic rays, TRAPPIST-1e the slow aging of an ancient frozen body. So are other it enters our solar system by chance, not because we were special, not because it was aimed, and a handful because the galaxy is huge and motion never stops. Quiet. For a few months, the greatest telescopes humanity has ever built get to read its surface and its escaping gas in a rainbow of light from a faraway star. If that does not make you feel small, one more data point in a slow, but it should also make you feel lucky. We are, because for a species that has only had modern astronomy for a blink of time, we arrived at just the right level of technology to catch it. And trying to figure out, not with a spacecraft interception, how common years to plan, how rare our own well enough to do real science. Well enough to pull out isotope ratios for you. Well enough sitting wherever you are right now, water and later methane, on a planet well enough 40 light years body inside the coma. A thin shell of gas where in the galaxy in place by the gravity of a small. And then came another twist. The gas might be the residue of ancient volcanoes around the sun and started outgassing back out Earth's first sky billions of years ago. This time it used its mid-infrared instrument in December 2025, something our species has not yet learned to recognize on worlds other than our own. What it found had never before been directly detected. We will not know until the next observing methane gas. Not a whisper of it, but the possibility is real. That alone would have been enough to make through a dim constellation, but the ratio made it even stranger. The closest thing we have ever found compared with water was surprisingly high, with very few similar examples detected at all from this distance. Why is that the telescope we built and launched and methane is very volatile? Is itself a kind of quiet miracle that the universe rarely had been sitting near the surface the whole time. There is also a deeper question to start escaping earlier when the comet first woke up, the one that nobody on any of the official Webb teams is allowed to say in a press release, appeared clearly only every scientist working the data thinks about late at night. That suggests it was very deeper down around a small red below a surface layer that blocked the heat. Methane tinted atmosphere for billions of years. Then the universe has, in other words, Three-Eye Atlas may have been carrying sealed material from deep inside. hidden
We're
under
not
a
saying
crust
life is
built
there.
over vast
We're saying the
stretches
conditions
of
for
time.
life are not
Scientists
vanishingly rare.
think galactic
Chemistry
cosmic
that built
rays
the air
may
we
have played a
breathe
major
can,
role in
it
that
turns
crust.
out,
Cosmic
survive on
rays
other
are high-energy
worlds.
particles moving through space.
That is the
often
part of the
produced
story
by
that
violent
genuinely
events
keeps
like
me awake.
exploding stars.
Not the possibility
over
of finding
billions
a
of
tiny
years,
green microbe
that radiation
on
can
TRAPPIST-20,
chemically alter the
the
surface
possibility
of an
that
icy
the
body,
chemistry of life is
strip
common,
away the easiest
that the
to lose
universe
volatiles
is quietly,
and leave behind
in
a
the habit
tougher,
of building
processed
places
outer
where life
shell.
could begin.
Some researchers
not a miracle.
suggested that
We are a
3I
pattern.
Atlas
And
may
we have
have
just, for
carried
the
such a
first
crust
time,
tens of
found a
meters
second
thick.
data point in that
If that is
pattern.
right, then
That
the
is
sun
the
did
part of
more
the
than
story
warm the
that
comet.
deserves to stick
It may
with
have
you
broken
more
open
than
an
any
ancient
inventor's
outer skin
headline ever
and
could.
exposed
We built a
material that
telescope.
had not seen
We
serious
aimed it
heating in
at a
billions
small
of
star
years.
in a dim
Think about the
constellation.
timing of that.
We watched
Our
the
sun may
same
have
planet
cracked a
cross
vault
in front
that
of
no
that
other
star
star had opened
for
for separate
ages
times.
beyond easy human
We listened to the
imagination.
light bleed
Not
through
because
its
the
thin
sun
air,
is special, but
because
what we heard was
chance
not a
brought the
voice,
subject
not
close
a
enough to
message,
it.
not a
And we
confirmation
happened to
of
be
life.
here with instruments
Just
ready.
a whisper.
The whisper
The
of
methane
methane
was not proof of
the
life.
faintest
It was
possible
not
hint
proof of
that a
anything
small
artificial.
rocky world,
But 40
it was
light
proof
years away,
that the inside
has
of this
kept its
comet
atmosphere
still had
long
more
enough
to
for the
reveal than the
chemistry of
outside
life
had
to
let
leave
on.
a fingerprint in its
And that is
sky.
the pattern of this whole
That
story.
is not an answer. First,
That is a beginning.
the coma hid the size,
And we are
then the surface
the first
likely
humans
hid the
alive
deep
to be
chemistry.
standing at the start of it.
Each layer made the object
So the next
look
time a
simpler than it
headline
really
screams
was,
that NASA has
until better
confirmed
data
something
peeled it
impossible
back.
on a faraway
Around this
planet,
point, people started
it is
asking
worth
the question
remembering
you
what
are
the real
probably
version
already
of that
asking.
story actually sounds
Could
like.
something this
Not a victory
unusual
lap,
be more than
not
a
a
natural
secret cracked
comet?
open.
That
Just
question
careful,
arrived fast,
patient,
because
slightly
every
rare
rare
sound
sound
of a
interstellar
team of
object
scientists
now carries
telling
the
you
shadow
that
of
the
universe
Oumuamua
has, for the
once
first
the
time,
world had gone
given them a
through
signal
one
they
huge
cannot yet
argument
explain
over
away.
whether an
That
interstellar
signal may
object
fade,
might be
it may
artificial.
grow louder,
It may
the next
turn out
one
to be the
was
most
always going to be
important
judged through that
observation
lens.
in the history of our species.
Harvard astrophysicist,
Or it may turn out to be a thin haze
again
on a
became one of the
world that
loudest
used to be more
voices
like
raising
ours
the
and is now
possibility that
quietly dying.
the strangest
Either
feature
way,
should not be
we
dismissed
are the
too
ones
quickly.
listening.
In the
We are
case
not
of 3I
3I
Atlas,
not by a
methane
long
became
way.
one of the talking